The most important thing to remember when you're trying to raise capital using a joint venture is you don't get to make that decision. The regulators get to decide whether your deal is a joint venture or a syndication or a securities offering. I get this all the time, people calling me and saying, hey, Mauricio, I want to do this as a joint venture. It's not a lot of money, or it's just my friends and family, or whatever excuse they want to give, but they want to do it as a joint venture in order to avoid all of the securities compliance that they need to do if it's a syndication. Well, again, just calling something a joint venture isn't going to make a securities offering not a securities offering. So the important thing to remember is a securities offering is when you take money from investors where the returns are generated by your efforts, meaning you're doing all the work and they're just giving you money and expecting you to generate the return for them. So in order for a joint venture to avoid being considered a security, you need to flip that. It needs to say something along the lines of everybody is contributing proportionally such that the returns are generated by everyone's effort, meaning everybody's actively involved. Everybody's rolling up their sleeves and doing some sort of work in the deal. Now, not everybody needs to do the deal equally. It just needs to be proportionate. So maybe I'm just a 5% partner, but I'm only putting in 5% of the money and I'm only working 5% of the time because I already have a full-time job. So it doesn't have to be equal, but it needs to be proportionate. Here are some of the telltale signs that your joint venture is really a securities offering. You have little or no voting power in the partnership. You have no or little involvement in the business or the investment. You're literally just providing the capital. You have little or no experience in the business itself. So in our case, if you're doing a real estate joint venture, you don't have any experience in real estate. And finally, you have too many joint venture partners. Usually the SEC limits you to about 5. They argue that if you have more than 5 joint ventures, it's really difficult to argue that everybody is actively involved and everybody's contributing to the return. There's always 1 or 2 that are primarily there to just provide the capital. You know, my good friend Tom Wheelwright, who's best known for being a rich dad tax advisor, likes to say, if you want to change your tax, you've got to change your facts. He's pretty well known for saying that. And I've kind of taken that in the JV and syndication context, where if you want to change it from a syndication or a securities offering to a joint venture, then you've got to change your facts. You've got to change the structure so that the returns are generated by everyone's effort and there isn't 1 or 2 or 3 people that are basically running the show and the returns are generated by their efforts. So if you're considering doing a joint venture, here are some best practices that I can come up with to help you make sure that what you're doing and the way you're structuring your deal is in fact a joint venture. Number 1 is limit the joint venture participants to 5 or less. As I mentioned earlier, the SEC thinks that once you have more than 5, it's difficult to argue that everybody's actively involved. Number 2, make sure all joint venture participants have proportionate voting rights. Number 3, make sure all joint venture participants can vote on key decision-making functions. It's important here to understand that not everybody has to be involved in the day-to-day, but all of the major decisions. So in real estate, for example, whether to buy, whether to sell, whether to refinance, whether to hire a property manager or fire a property manager or make a purchase that exceeds, $10,000 or $50,000, all those key decisions should be made by all of the partners, even though 1 person or 2 people might run the day-to-day. Number 4, don't give yourself unlimited control as a manager. So this is really one of the key distinctions. The more control you give yourself, the more and more it starts to look like a syndication, because the less and less control everybody else has, and it starts to look like you're the one making all the decisions. So avoid the temptation of giving yourself all of the control and make sure that the control and the voting of the decisions is made proportionate to the other members. Number 5, make sure all the joint venture participants have some sort of experience and skills in the specific business that would provide a benefit to the joint venture. Again, if you have never invested or have no idea about real estate, it's going to be difficult for you to argue that you are a joint venture in the enterprise contributing to the return of the capital if you have no idea about real estate. I'll leave you with this key piece of advice. Before you do a joint venture, please run it by a securities attorney and make sure that it's not a securities offering. And only then would I proceed in hiring an attorney, probably a business lawyer, to draft your joint venture documents. So if you enjoyed this clip and you want to see the entire episode, click here. And if you want to see other videos similar to this, click here.